Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. My name is Jason Johnson, and I have the great honor of serving as director of the City of Seattle's Human Services Department. I'm so sorry I missed your first meeting, and just want to say thank you for serving in this really important role. Today, in partnership with Leo Flor from King County Department of Communities, I'm going to help us move through your today your group culture or group norms, system and services. Spend some time discussing and discussers. Land acknowledgement. I want to, simply acknowledge that we are on traditional land of the first people of Seattle. It's past and present, and I honor for being here. I know we're going to do roll. Anderson. Anderson, wanted to provide you with an hello again.
And to be a part of things. Pastor Church in the city of Seattle. It is the oldest African church in the thing goes back to 1886. And we've been in the same location since that time. We're on 14th where the CHOP was. It's us to get to learn.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome. And then the governing committee, Michael Ramos, implementation board, first meeting. And so I want.
Yes, it's a joy to be in the same room, my friend and colleague. I just want to say the church council's been involved. Homelessness work since helping us use Service Center 40 years ago. Ending homelessness since we convened the Political Will to End Homelessness Conference in 2001. Bring that to this table. And for those of you who I'm meeting for the first time, to serve with you and to learn much.
Great. Before we really get started, just another acknowledgement. Your going meeting time is still being established. I believe there are attempts to survey your availability. There also may be times needed or meetings this year to just keep the work to stand up the King County Regional Homeless Authority forward. We know that there will be 2 special meetings occurring jointly with the governing committee. One will be focused on alignment of racial equity, and one will be focused on the recruitment of the King. So more to come, but I just wanted to bring this up for your awareness and also just acknowledge that there's still work happening. Make sure that you guys are the calendar, you're on some meeting times. So before I pass to Leo, I wanted to check in with Sola. 1 and 2, I think we wanted to hold some time on today's agenda for public comment.
Thanks, Jason. I'll quickly call the roll, and then we will open a comment. If you have public comment, please go to the chat window and write in your name, and Carrie will kind of manage who gets to go first. We'll call you in the order that your name comes up, and everyone will have 2 minutes to speak. We will make sure to get public comment onto the agenda for the next meeting. We all managed to miss that somehow. But calling so Reverend Dr. Carrie Anderson.
Present.
Thank you. Nate Caminos.
Here.
Thank you.
Carvalho.
Thank you. John Chomanayak.
Here.
Helen Henry.
Present.
Odom.
Present.
Dr. Damian Patnud.
Here.
Michael Ross.
Here.
Sarah Ring.
Here.
And then Juanita Spotted Elk.
Present.
Great, thank you. Everyone is here accounted for.
And that means we have quorum.
Yes. So we have called roll. We have quorum. 10 minutes set aside for public comment. If you would like verbal comment, type your name in the chat queue to go through questions. At this time, I'm not seeing anything in the chat or in questions. Just give it another moment.
I just opened it. Folks can go ahead, their name in.
So I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A window. However, if you have anything that you want to make sure you're providing, you should be able to put your name into the chat window. Everyone has 2 minutes to share. Carrie will unmute you once you have been called on. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I think we can give this back over.
Thanks, thanks, Carrie. All right, Leo, I think I'm passing things over to you for the grounding question.
All right, good afternoon, board members. Again, my name is Leo Floor from King County's Department of Community and Human Services. You endured a lot of talking from me at the last meeting, and so I will turn the tables now. Just acknowledging the fact that among the things that are more difficult or that are more awkward in a Zoom type meeting is the ability for the board itself to get to know each other, to cohere. You will be making profound decisions and very technical, detailed decisions over the coming months, and building relationships is an important part of the ability of the board to have productive conversations and to really grapple with issues that will be difficult. So the question is really, as board members, what is your direction? What is your preference for how you all can really begin to come together, get to know each other, and then also cohere around some sort of first principles or theory of change for how the board will operate going forward. And what we would like to do is we have on this screen right now folks who have done meetings in many different contexts at this point and have seen different ways that work or don't work. And we'd really like to get from you your guidance and your discussion with each other about what works to make a group like this form into a team, into a board, in an environment that is prohibiting physical co-location or proximity right now.
Actually, Leo, before we jump into it, I noticed that one of our attendees, Joey Kita, had written in, and I'm wondering if they had just missed our public comment piece. Would it be okay if they, oh, sorry.
Actually, I'm going to jump in and say normally we open and give the instructions about public comment, and then about half an hour later, after folks have had time to add to the queue, we'll open it up for public comment. So maybe we'll go ahead with this next section of the agenda and then come back afterwards. Does that sound good, everyone? Great, let's do that.
And I am told and trained that if we hold awkward silence for long enough, someone will break in and then start what will become a rich conversation. So again, the question, as board members, not being able to be in the same room together right now and chat as you get food or take breaks, what would work in this environment, which we will be in for months? What would work to help you all come together as a team, as a board, and get to know each other?
I can go.
Oh, go ahead.
I think small group conversations work better. I find that when we're in large groups, we always end up having that awkward silence, which I'm also really okay with. But I like having smaller groups. I think it allows us to get each other more. And I've been in a lot of meetings, and I don't know if this is okay since it's a government ran board, but we often have a Google Doc where people can fill in questions. That way nothing is lost in these small group conversations that can't be shared with the whole group.
Thank you, Paula. And one of the things we were grappling with, and I think we owe answers back as staff on, is the intersection of the OPMA and sort of breakout groups. But technology can solve problems for us. And so I think we're continuing to do analysis there. So we've got from Paula breakouts plus sort of a common recording or a written instrument that can help share information. What else?
Gordon here, thinking that we spend some time, especially early in our convening, getting to know each other, you know, beyond name, title, affiliation. So that's an ongoing suggestion. I may come back to that in a second. The other part would be perhaps at every meeting somehow sort of a check-in where how people are, or what are they thinking and feeling when it comes to issues around combating homelessness and housing instability, but some sort of way of checking in as to how we all are, how individually we are doing, which also gives some insights into the individual. I don't know if it'll work here. I went through a process last month, I think, where, you know, the opener or the icebreaker or the get to know was, you know, how did you get your name? And people could self-select as to their understanding or their willingness to share, you know, how they were named. And it was for me, it was very fascinating. And I learned information about people who I'd worked with that I never knew. So it may not be one that we all want to do, but it worked really well in this other setting. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Gordon. And just, you know, for folks' context, we are both recording and then recording what's going on here. And I think this really becomes a list of ideas that a board chair or chairs will be able to draw from once we've designated chairs to begin to set up the norms and culture of this board as it goes forward. Who else has a suggestion or would like to offer a technique? Adrian.
Adrian has her hand up.
I think Damien had his hand up first, so I just wanted to note that. I just wanted to build on what both Paula and Gordon said. It might be nice to set aside time at every meeting to do random breakout groups so that we can, you know, have 15 minutes or so to get to know all the different folks in the who are on the implementation board. And I like Gordon's suggestion about questions that have nothing to do with the work at hand, but just help us to get a sense of who each of us are as people and get to know each other and build trust.
Thank you, Adrian. And then Damien, did you want to go?
Actually, I didn't have my hand up, but I know Nate has been really trying to get in, so I'll allow him to jump in.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah, just and then to John Shalmanek too. I see his hand up next after me. You know, ideally, we would want to try and have some sort of board retreat, right? And to be able to spend a very long period of time to be able to get into a lot of these items, not just on the work at hand, but also just a deeper dive into the bios and beyond the introduction that we've had for our two individuals today and the rest of the board on our first meeting just a couple of weeks ago. And so, you know, that's probably going to be somewhat challenging given these times, but it's something that just to consider. Not maybe necessarily now, but in sometime in the shorter or long-term future. I also had thought it through about the small groups due to quorum or due to just some of those dynamics, whether it's adding on to the 90 minutes that we already have dedicated to these meetings to do an initial 15 or 30, as was mentioned prior. But also to your part of your second question to Leo and the group was, what are some of the cultural norms and some of the cultural work that we want to do in terms of the foundation of the values of the board that we like to move forward. And I think if we were to try and identify that second part of that question, at least somewhat substantively today, that can be maybe one of our next breakout group discussions, to have those discussions, come up with those ideas, and then come back to the full board together as a group.
Thank you, Nate. And I believe John had his hand up.
Sure. And now I'm just trying to figure out how I lower it, but I'll figure that out in a minute. So I'm not as familiar with Zoom, so I don't know if you can do small group breakouts yet in Zoom. I know Microsoft Teams is looking at adding it. So a small group is always a good thing. You know, over the years, whether working as a staff member or as an elected, I learned a lot about people through the retreat process. So at a point that we might be able to do that, I think it's good. But I worked for an organization once that when they brought you on, they did a short, it was a national organization. They did a short little bio about you. And the guy asked some kind of fascinating questions. So maybe some questions. The one that he asked that I thought was very interesting was, have you ever had a near-death experience? That certainly is something not all people have had. That might be something that some people would want to share. But also maybe something along the lines of, what is a story from your life where you learned something? You learned how to make a decision. You learned how to act. You learned something. And just, you know, whatever it happens to be. And to talk about that, because I think the way we all take in information is important to understand for others in the organization. So it's kind of getting that personal relationship. And now I'll figure out where lower hand is. I know it's in participants, right?
Thank you, John. Damien?
There's not too much new to add beyond what others have shared, but I would say that given the challenges around OPMA and doing breakouts, that I would think it would make more sense to have some type of special meeting set up, like a leadership retreat that Nate mentioned, just so that the public knows what they're getting into if they're going to come in and hear us listen to our stories. Not that we're not interesting people in and of ourselves, but some people will be here more for the business aspects of the meeting rather than that. So just being real, providing clarity to the public about the purpose for the meeting and the agenda items, I think would be helpful.
Wonderful. Michael?
Yes, I would just add to all those helpful comments to be consciously talking about how we bring a racial equity lens to all our work. There's a lot of discussion around how this body can do things differently than in the past. The only way to do it differently is by acting differently. And so I would suggest that whether it is an initial discussion at the beginning of meetings with some tools of conversation that such like the Affordable Housing Committee uses at the county level, and or small group conversation, or as part of a retreat. I think all those means can be helpful to begin to conceptualize our work differently, and therefore the results will be different as well. And so I'm excited to work with you in all those fronts.
Thank you, Michael. And using that as a segue to really get at the second part of the question, is there any thought or advice or discussion right now amongst board members about how to get into some of that substantive discussion around principles and what it will look like to actually to do it differently, to center race and equity in a different way, and how you do that in this environment as well?
Gordon here. I appreciate Michael's input, and I guess I would build on to say I think we need to do it. Whatever we do around racial equity, we should do it explicitly. And so I think we should take some time to come up with some principles and guidelines. I mean, the county has some, the city has some, many of our organizations have them. So I think we just have to figure out, you know, what do we collectively think are the priorities around racial equity, both principles and outcomes. And then, of course, our norms for how we engage in candid, courageous conversations with each other.
Thank you. And I think Harold has his hand up.
Yes, the retreat sounds well. there are enough places where small groups can meet. United Way has a big room, City of Seattle has a big room, County has a big room, and I'm thinking of not more than 6 people in a big room where we can meet, say hi, get to know each other. But also, we need to, the equity and the equality of what we're bringing to this group has to be based on the principle of the theory of change. I was with the group when we've worked a lot of hours, a lot of days. We had retreats before March on just working out the theory of change. And if we're going to do something different, we're going to center the people that are most impacted. Policy decisions, we all know those. We can, as people have said, it's nice to see you again, nice to be on a board with you again. We've trashed those things over and over. Picking up the theory of change, centering those who are most impacted. If we can meet around discussing that theory and how we're going to come to the table using that theory of change, everything we do, how is it going to impact the people we serve? And get to know each other's thoughts on that. And I think that'd be a valuable discussion.
Thank you, Harold. So I hear there, what does it look like to use a discussion about how to center the people who are affected by the decisions that you will take and that you'll be responsible for? What does it look like to learn each other and get to know each other in the context of those discussions, and how you might make meaningful that commitment of the authority? Juanita had her hand up. Oh.
Hi, thank you. Well, for one, I appreciate Johnson, what's his name again? Sorry, Jason Johnson. Thank you so much for the land acknowledgement. I think that was a great way, a great beginning to use the racial equity lens and honor this land and the things that have happened in this territory, and to part of the process to center the people that are involved and that are affected by homelessness. And I think that's just a great way to bring back some of the good things and acknowledging that, and then making wrongs right. And I wanted to add to the retreat, I agree with that. Having a community meal would be an awesome way, or even sharing things that are personal, or some of our personal stories. And and I know there is a lot of other ways that, and each culture is different, each tribe is different. But I know when we did the retreat, the Theory of Change retreat, Ray Williams did the blessing in that work in the beginning. And I really appreciate that we had the opportunity to start this new change in the regional authority work. And I felt like that was something that really was a big part of, honoring this area, and then also to be able to have a blessing in the work. And so that's something that I take a lot of pride in, and having an elder, open up the space and recognizing that this circle is sacred, and that all of us that are participating in this work, that we're all sacred and we have all value and we all have great ideas. And great, just to all learn together, learn from each other. And I think that really is a great way to have a personal connection, rather than, how would you say, something that's, you sit at a table, but you don't really know the people, and you're not really getting a heart-to-heart type connection. So, but anyway, that's something I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. And then just for your colleagues on the governing committee are also right now conceptualizing and planning for a race equity training that they will be participating in. And I believe that their hope is that they will be able to have you join them, so that the governing committee and implementation board can be together to do some focused work around defining race equity and what that will look like in the way the authority and its governing bodies, including you as the implementation board, will work together. So we have your guidance and your input, hearing a lot of enthusiasm for a retreat and figuring out the way that we can do that at the intersection of Zoom and the OPMA, which is a solvable problem, and we will solve. And that brings us to the next part of our agenda, which is some startup discussions that reference some memorandums that you've all received, and I'll hand it back over to Jason.
And actually, Leo, I think we're going to do the public comment period now. We said we were going to wait until we got a couple names in. So if that's okay, we'll just jump into that. And so now we'll take public comment. We've set aside 10 minutes to hear from members of the public. If you wish to comment and have not yet typed your name in the city into the chat window to be called upon, please do so. Each individual will be given 2 minutes to comment. I'll call on individuals in the order in which they've provided their name, and we'll unmute you for those 2 minutes. Once you've reached your 2 minutes, I'll ask you to finish your comment and call on the next speaker. So we'll close the public comment period at 4:12 p.m., 10 minutes from now. So public comment is now open. And we first have on our list Joey Kita of Washington chapter of, I'll go ahead and let you announce yourself. Give me just one moment to go ahead and unmute you. And I don't know if I see Joey on the line anymore as an attendee. Okay. As I don't see Joey on the line, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next person. So the next person that we have for public comment is Bill Curlin Hackett out of Auburn. Your public comment period starts as soon as I unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I know many of you. Bill Curlin Hackett, I direct the Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness. Greetings to all of you I know. I can't greet you individually, and I hope to meet all of you at some point. I'll sit in on as many of your meetings as I possibly can. You're being asked to hit the ground running in this transition, and the unsheltered homeless, as you well know, remain every night, every day. Thankfully, we have many good providers who are sustaining good work, and yet it's short of what we need, and I think that's why you're where you are. One example that we've taken on in the last 10 years, simply because it was vacant, was people living in vehicles, unsheltered. We know from the recent count that at least half of the unsheltered are living in vehicles. I'm hoping that the Lived Experience Coalition can be a strong voice toward ways that we might address that because of their experience and because of folks like Sarah being part of this. This week, we finally start a contract that the City of Seattle offered last budget season on doing outreach to vehicles who are in scofflaw, which means tickets, and or just reaching out to people generically who are in vehicles. Now, because the budget year is passing and we are near the end of it, we're going to do as much work as we can before December 31st. But we'll be doing outreach and forming a blueprint to people living in vehicles and then referring them through the Urban League so that hopefully they can get out of those vehicles. But we have an enormous problem in this city. You see it for those of you that go in Seattle, and I see it throughout the county. Some people think it's okay to live in a vehicle. Well, it really isn't. You can learn from Sarah what the legal ramifications are, but it's also very difficult because so many of them just aren't healthy. We'll be taking PPE with us as we go out this week, and hopefully not bump into too many people who are ill, because I don't think anybody's checking in. So as I said, you have a big challenge in front of you as all home winds down. Many providers are going to keep up their work under contract, but we're sitting there with a giant void. So I encourage you,
2 minutes.
As fast as you can go, go.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other public comments, so we can go ahead and return to the agenda. Thank you so much.
All right, Carrie, thank you. And thanks, Leo. So this next part of the discussion, hopefully you've all had a chance to review the materials that were sent out last week regarding 6 key operational decisions. The governing committee approved budget authority for the stand-up costs associated with the regional authority. This was both for the CEO to immediately begin building their team upon hire, but critically important and immediately important are some critical systems and structures to have the regional authority stood up and have some important functions and structures in place to be able to purchase, pay bills, and bring on the first employee, the CEO, and employees after that individual is hired. The items in your packet included the fiscal officer, payroll services, insurance, healthcare benefits, Social Security participation, as well as Washington State PERS participation. What I'd like to ask is Sola Plumacher, I understand you have a PowerPoint that'll help both to present a brief overview of each of these items and will help facilitate a discussion and next steps. As we hear from Sola and start to understand each of these items a little more fully, I do want to ask and hear from the board what other additional information, what more do you need in order to assist you in decision making on these items? So keep that in mind as we move through this information, helping us understand what else would be helpful ahead of your decision on these items. So Sola, I'll pass things over to you.
Great, thanks, Jason. Hopefully you all can see my screen. I'm sharing a PowerPoint presentation. I know it's the most boring way to convey material, but given where we are, figured it would be the easiest way to conceptualize what I want you all to be thinking about and grounded in today. So there are 6 key areas, as Jason mentioned. We have already talked a little bit about what they are. In order to give you all a little bit of background about how we have come to land on these 6 key items and what has been done to bring together information for you all to think about, I'll just give you a bit of kind of landscape. So there is a team composed of members of the City of Seattle and King County who have been looking into these 6 areas. There's been a fiscal team organized and an HR team, both to start thinking about what are the key operational needs of this organization, which we are starting completely from scratch. What are the key elements to ensure that we can operate the organization, that insurance is provided to protect members of the governing committee, the implementation board, and the staff in terms of liability? How do we make sure once we actually have a CEO on board that we can pay them and pay subsequent staff afterwards? What do we need in terms of accounting services? And how do we get there? What does it look like to pull our systems of accounts and our cash management and handling practices together, records management, etc. And then we want to talk a little bit about the options for public employees regarding healthcare, dental, vision, long-term disability, etc. And then 2 options around Social Security and the public employees retirement system. I know that there is a lot of detail that backs each of these memos up that you received, and we're happy to provide as much detail as you all are interested in, but really just wanted to give a quick introduction to what we've reviewed before we meet at our next meeting, where we're going to ask you all to vote on some next steps. So question to keep in mind for you all is what additional information is needed to help you make the most informed decision possible? And what more do you want these staff groups to bring back to you in the future? So in terms of insurance, there's an ILA requirement that the governing committee, IB, and KCRHA staff have insurance. This is essentially liability insurance to protect members of the governing bodies, protect them against any action or claim that is instituted out of performance, lack of performance, any other challenges that might arise through the organization. We can either use broker-based services through current King County contracts or through current city contracts. If we were to go with broker services, we would need to go through a procurement process. That process could take upwards of 3 to 6 months based on our current estimates, which means that we may not have insurance in place for all of you for quite some time. We also could go with an insurance pool, and there are a couple of options for insurance pools which don't require procurement, so it would be easier as a short-term solution to purchase services through that avenue as opposed to waiting for the complete RFP process. I highlight that this must occur ASAP because I am sure that you all are interested in making sure that you're covered as members of this board, as I am sure the governing committee are also wanting to be covered in terms of liability. In terms of cost, I think that either route we take, the cost is pretty minimal, and I didn't do a cost comparison here in this slide, but if folks are interested in reviewing if there are garnishments or benefits that need to be addressed, need to be paid for through employee contributions. The paycheck systems both manage that. And then in addition to payroll processing, both ADP and Paychecks also offer HR support, which can be as simplistic as benefits administration or as detailed as policy and procedure development, HR support with HR like laws and regulations. It can also, they can provide these as a la carte items as opposed to full set packages. So something that we wanted to look at is what could we pick and choose with these options to support the authority and their future employees in the best way possible. I think either of these are good options. And like I said, the costs are very similar. Again, we have comparison materials that we can send all of you, and I'm happy to entertain questions about what these look like once we've just kind of gone through the highlights. Another recommendation is that we need a significant amount of work to occur to establish accounting systems. It's been determined that the authority it would be in the best interest of the authority to establish their own system of accounts as opposed to going through either the county or the city to manage their fiscal responsibility. And at this time, we think it makes sense to outsource that service to a couple of firms that we've reviewed, one being Robert Half and the other is Clark Newber. Both do a significant amount of work in this space as kind of temporary outsourcers of labor and can come in and set up the authority to adhere to local and federal requirements around cash management. They can run banking RFPs to set us up with systems of accounts and banking accounts. I've listed 4 kind of general activities that either could be involved in. From a cost comparison, I think that Robert Half is competitive and wants to offer a discount to the authority of up to 25% for the initial startup, as they are really excited about the opportunity to work with the authority. I'm going to pause because I saw Harold's hand was raised. So Harold, do you have a question?
Thank you, Sola. Can you answer what kind of equity or equity framework did you go through when vetting any of the possible people that we would hire, or your suggestions? And I would like to see that as part of the theory of change before we have any recommendations, how you vetted them as far as equity in the employees and equity on the board. I think if we continue going back to the same old way of getting the same old people to do the same work for us, we're never going to change how we do our work. So that's my comment, and I wish we could see that before recommendations were brought to the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's talk about at the end, once we've kind of gone through each of these. So then in terms of healthcare, the regional authorities employees will qualify for public health benefit options, not public health, but public employee health benefit options. And there are two in Washington state that the employees would qualify for. One is the Association of Washington Cities. And the Association of Washington Cities offers a comprehensive menu of options, health, vision, dental. They also do an employee assistance program, which is unique compared to the other option. They offer long-term disability, workers' compensation for employees at the regional authority, and they also have the ability to do benefits administration, which would then reduce the cost to payroll services overall. One of the critical things that we want to ensure in terms of equity for current employees is access to robust health benefits, health and wellness benefits across the board. And I think AWC offers the best options for that. And I think in your materials, I provided some comparisons. There's also the Public Employees Benefits Board, or PEB. PEB is offered through the Washington State Healthcare Authority, offers the same type of coverage with the exception of EAP. So Employee Assistance Program is not offered by PEB. The cost of PEB, I wrote here that it is cost effective. It is cost effective in terms of the plans that they offer. However, the employee contribution to PEB is higher than it is with the AWC. So in other words, employees would have to pay more to participate in PEB than they would with AWC. So just something that we want to consider as we go forward. And then the last two are around Social Security and PERS. So Social Security is optional for employers. I don't know if you all knew that. I didn't know that. This is new information for me. So the authority does not have to sign up all of their staff to participate in Social Security as long as they offer an alternate retirement plan. However, we think it makes sense for the authority to have employees contribute a portion of their earnings to the Social Security program, in addition to offering access to PERS, the Public Employee Retirement System, which we'll talk about in a moment. We think that most employees or potential employees expect to participate in Social Security as part of their being employed by a significantly large provider of services. The contribution from employees would be 6.2% of their earnings. And then the regional authority, in addition to that, would also contribute 6.2%. So equal participation both on employee and employer side of annual earnings towards Social Security. There is no penalty for not contributing to Social Security. the problem becomes future focused for any individuals who are employed by the regional authority. If we were to not engage in Social Security as a retirement option, they would not receive that credit in the future if they were to need to rely upon Social Security as a benefit. So then lastly is the public employees retirement system. So City of Seattle staff currently enjoy the City of Seattle employees retirement system. It's called CSRS. And PERS is essentially the same benefit, and King County staff, as well as staff across Washington State working in other governmental entities, have access to the public employees retirement system. And so we would look to you all to vote the employees into PERS. And the contribution rate for PERS are 7.9% for employees and then 12.86% for employers. So the employer has a higher contribution rate in this model than in Social Security. And then additionally, I would just note that if any City of Seattle or King County staff were to move to the authority, they would retain their current service credits. So City of Seattle employees moving to PERS would maintain all of their City of Seattle service credit hours if they were to move to PERS. So ensuring equity for all staff that move over and retaining their past benefits, I think, is really critical. And the same is true for King County staff. There is one additional caveat that I didn't highlight here in a bullet, and that caveat is that City of Seattle employees who may become employed at the regional authority, likely will become employed at the regional authority, would be able to maintain their benefits with CSRS rather than moving over to PERS. But then those employees would be grandfathered into an option to extend. Any new employees of the regional authority that were to start would only be able to access the PERS system. So I will stop with that. I know it was a lot of information really briefly, but I wanted to allow you all to have some time for questions and discussions and to point us in the right direction. I would just like to thank my team. I know that Michelle, Rick Hayes, and Denise Brewer are on the phone, and they've been amazing over at King County in supporting us and pulling this information together. So thanks, team. I will stop sharing.
Okay, so now is time for discussion, and I see, oh, I gotta open participants to get hands. Sim, already? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so thanks very much for going through that with us. You mentioned the need to, or the recommendation to obtain a fiscal officer or accounting services. You had mentioned that it was thought to be better to not have that go through the City of Seattle or King County. Could you just explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and it really just comes down to kind of cleanliness and being able to streamline for the organization to make sure that the regional authority is set up as efficiently as possible without blurring the lines between the city and the county. Because while the city and the county are contributing funds to the authority, we really are setting this up to be an interlocal joint governmental entity that is, you know, in many ways separate. And so it made sense to both the fiscal team at the city and the fiscal team at the county and our risk management folks to really start the regional authority off on the right foot and an independent foot using outsourced services to set this up. And one thing that I would highlight is that we recommend, our work teams recommend, that this happens before the CEO comes on board. And there are a lot of kind of chicken or egg questions and questions about whether or not the cart's before the horse with some of this, because We also want the CEO to be able to establish the organization. We think that we're going to find somebody who is incredibly skilled, and their ability should be to manage all of the operational oversight needs and establishment of the authority. But at the same time, we want to be able to pay that CFO and have them get to work on the really big questions of how do we really address homelessness using a racial equity lens in King County. And to the extent that we can set them up for success by putting some of these things together on the back end, we think they're the better able, the CEO will be able to come in and sort out their leadership team initially and really hit the ground running.
Thanks so much.
There was a comment I see from Nate. So Clark Newber, I think they are based in Bellevue, and they have contracts with King County. And Robert Half is, I don't know where they're based, but their team would be kind of multifaceted. They would be they would be folks from this region in particular, and they would work with another entity called Protiva, and they're doing some very similar work in Sacramento, California right now, establishing a new homeless services system down there from the ground up. So they've got some experience in this work and kind of understanding the regulatory needs of a federally funded organization. So I really appreciated that they had some of that kind of background understanding and knowledge.
Thanks, Scylla.
Sarah would like to hear some discussion on Harold's question. And I think, so in terms of the equity lens, I think what our focus as the HR team and the fiscal team was really on was in terms of the healthcare benefits, payroll services, Social Security and employee retirement systems. Those are all employee focused systems that we wanted to ensure all of our current employees have access to the exact same benefits and services that they have had while employed with the City of Seattle or with King County. So in terms of just kind of continuity of care for our employees, that was what we were really looking to ensure with these options. I think that they all offer similar, if not better, benefits in the future. I think if we were to talk about whether these are WIMBY-based organizations, I would say that that I don't know the answer to that. I think that some of them are very large and probably not equity focused, but that's certainly something we can go back and look at. And if there are other questions that folks might have about how we're ensuring the equity-based decision-making framework that is called out in the NIS report in some of these business operations, we could certainly review that future state, but I keep a copy of it next to my computer and then constantly reviewing. And what the NIS report talks about in terms of equity-based decision-making around business operations is outlined on page 24 of the NIS report. And it really focuses on participatory budgeting, the RFP framework, and contractor selection. So we would really focus in terms of equity on those aspects when we were to procure additional services. So insurance services, actual procurement for CFO type services through Clark Newber, et cetera. We did not make any selection at this point. We're just primarily bringing you options to think about, and then tell us what you want us to do next to get you what you need. I see Gordon's hand up.
Thank you. I had one comment and one question of clarification. After Harold raised a really good point about equity, I thought about it in terms of the outgoing service retention that this authority would be doing. But then I thought about it from another lens, which is when we are part of creating this entity for the CEO and for the staff, there is this concept that it exists on a relative basis to the City of Seattle and to King County. So I would want our package of benefits and I guess if compensation and benefits to be no less than what the city and the county are offering. So that when we recruit and when the CEO we recruit the CEO and the CEO recruits their staff, the staff that come to work for this very important mission-driven, unique entity are on the same footing, compensation and benefits, or better than what the city and the county are. So that would be a principle that I would like to suggest to my fellows on the implementation board. My question of clarification is, just so I understand, I did not know that Social Security was optional. So I've learned something today. Thank you. Am I correct understanding that we can put forward a retirement schema where employees of this authority would contribute to and be beneficiaries of Social Security and beneficiaries of PERS? Okay.
Yes.
Then later, when we're ready to make a motion or a discussion, I'll be advocating that we do both Social Security and PERS, so that all staff, CEO and staff, have the maximum amount of retirement possible when they finish their working careers. I'll stop.
Great, Gordon, thank you. I see John, then Harold, then Adrian. John?
I think probably staying with Social Security is most likely a good idea. The city of Bellevue does not do Social Security. We did a function called MBBT. The beauty of that is you are really controlling what you will be getting back from it versus the federal government controlling what you will be getting back from your Social Security and how they figured the deductions. The other, and I'm really sorry, you may have mentioned this during the presentation, but the ability of having I believe that we would have public employees, and I think is it a 427 plan that is akin to an IRA that the agency would offer?
Oh, the PERS is different. And we did not talk about deferred compensation at this point, which is another option. We thought we could wait a bit for that. We thought these were the critical items. So deferred compensation is certainly something to put on the list, as well as benefits and leave and, all of those kinds of policies that need to be established. But I think we might wait for those.
And I do think I agree with Gordon that we have to have a robust series of benefits. We also need to have, I think, the highest level of being able to be financially responsible, being able to track where money goes. And so that would be what I would be looking for in whoever we are bringing in to do our books for us, our accounts payable, setting up the standards by which payments are made. There are a lot of scam organizations out there. They are being very successful at getting into organizations and stealing people's money, to be bluntly honest with it. And it happens all across corporate America these days.
Great. Harold?
Yes, and so I appreciate you very much, especially that you were able to bring that equity framework up and know what it was and know what pages are. I thank you very much for your input and diving into that. Since we're there, I'd like to go to the operations of the CEO. Are you asking for the CEO to have monies that they can hire staff with to get up and going? I would say yes to that only if there was a hiring board that was very diverse culture and not of the city or county personnel in housing at any point. And I hope the Lived Experience Coalition would be part of that, or any diverse group. Because again, I want to go into this with the theory of change and that we are doing things vastly different than organizations and the city or the county have done before. And it's beside me that, like I've said, we cook up those eggs and save them for the next group, for the next group, for the next group. Those eggs are stale and out of date. Let's bring things, some robust and different ideas, or maybe ideas that are the same, but a different way of implementing them without any, okay, I'll give this idea, I'll do that idea, but if you do this or do that for me. Let's not bargain away homelessness. Let's just go after it like we know we should.
Adrian.
Thanks, Jason. I wanted to also first begin by saying thank you to the staff that put together some really good briefing memos, and it was a good PowerPoint presentation to crystallize things. It seems as if we're dealing with two different categories of decisions. We have one, the employee benefits package, and I concur with all those who have spoken before to say I think it's important to have a strong benefit package for the employees of the new authority. We know that some of the reasons for homelessness are inadequate healthcare, inadequate savings and retirement. And so if we're doing things differently, we want to ensure that the staff have good benefit packages. It seems that there is also the decisions about the organization, which is the CFO services, and then also the insurance for directors, the different boards. I would love to have more information specifically on the recommendations for those two areas, because I am wondering if there's an opportunity to make sure that we're providing access to firms that are founded, run by people of color to also participate. Just in a very quick look at Robert Half, Clark Newber, those are very large corporations. Those would not fit the bill. Maybe there's not an organization locally that has that experience, but I would certainly like to take a deeper dive there. And it does seem that there could be an insurance broker that could help provide the necessary protections for all of us on the board. Obviously, I agree that is something that we don't want to be meeting for a long time and have no protection for those of us, because for those of you who haven't worked in this area before, we are personally liable for some of those decisions. And so I think that we want to make sure that we do have coverage, but it would be great to get some more information about whether it's possible to have a diversity and equity lens for those procurements.
Great, happy to do that and bring that back to the group when we meet next, or prior to when we meet next, so you can review it when we meet next. Any other thoughts or questions?
Or more specifically, is there additional information that you need this week so that the next time you reconvene, you're in a position to make a proposal and take a vote on services that are in front of you right now?
I had a question about the payroll, about the insurance piece. So you made a pretty strong argument in favor of kind of taking that insurance pool approach to speed up the process. If either we or the CEO at a late, let's say we took that approach and use the insurance pool as you kind of recommend, but then later we or the CEO want to make a change, how long would we be locked in for?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll follow up on that. All right, if there's nothing else, I know we need to move to the next item on the agenda.
I just wanted to bring up one more point just related to the accounting system. I just wanted to emphasize how important that is, especially if it's an independent system, which I would support. We will have the primary responsibility for budgeting and therefore for transparency and accountability for the funds. I was at the governing board meeting last week, and while they have the official role, they really rely on us to set that standard. And so I'd be very careful to make sure that the system that is acquired and the firm that we work with can provide the best possible information that becomes accessible to the public and facilitates our working with those numbers.
Yes.
All right, thank you all so much for the discussion. We'll continue this at a future meeting. Leo, I think you're going to take us through this next aspect or next item on the agenda.
Excellent. Thank you. And looking at time also, I think this fits the same pattern of the last discussion, which is I'd like to just lay out some of the parameters for a decision that you'll all take. I don't know whether you'll want to act today or not, but if you chose not to act, this would be something that we're really setting up for your next meeting. So the question here is the establishment of officers. For folks who have not yet had the opportunity to memorize in whole the interlocal agreement, I did paste into the chat box some relevant sections from the interlocal agreement, but in a much pithier way. The ILA contemplates that we would at least establish a chair, a co-chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. And in the descriptions that I put into the chat box, there are some additional and specific information about the roles of each of those officers. And just to note it, some of those roles are substantial. The chair and the treasurer in particular have substantial responsibility over what will be an organization with an annual budget that will exceed $100 million and will have signature authority on behalf of the organization. And so these are important positions for many reasons, and that is one of those reasons. Those are two of those reasons, I suppose. And so would really like to invite discussion here if there are questions about the roles themselves, or there is some discussion about how you all as a board might engage in a process to identify who could occupy these roles.
Just a question and a comment. One is, Leo, just looking at the four positions altogether, or somewhat four on the agenda there, but looking at the ILA language, and it would be multiple co-chairs, and there's a great flexibility that exists in this manner. And so not reading the ILA from front to back, but thinking of the four. In the end, if we decide to go that route or expand it beyond, I think it is important from my perspective and going into this meeting that we at least have one person with lived experience, at least serving as a co-chair of this implementation board. I just also think that it's just going to be mindful for the diversity of our officers to be geographically diverse as well, from both Seattle, but also from someone from the other 38 cities, whether it's 4 members or 5 or 6 or whatever it happens to be. Just think, for as an example, Rainier Valley in Seattle is very different than Snoqualmie Valley, very different than Kent Valley. The issues are grave in terms of representation there and that leadership manner of this board makeup, but also just overall diversity and having board members of color represented in this leadership roles as well. So. But Leo, I had a sort of question, and maybe you might be able, or someone could expand on it too. Why prominently the treasurer and chair role, other than just being the signator to a lot of these items? Do you see that being a much larger workload compared to the others?
Thank you, Nate. And just to echo it, so I hear a emphasis or proposal on ensuring inclusion of folks who are here representing lived experience of homelessness within that executive team, and also taking a look at the geographic representation within the executive team, and then the racial ethnic diversity. And then to answer your question, section 2 that it's the third little coda that I just pasted into the comments. Talks about duties of officers. And so one of the things just to highlight here is the fact that the chair will have sole authority on behalf of the board to sign and bind the authority, obviously subject to overall direction by the implementation board. So the chair itself, in addition to setting and agendas and facilitating meetings, however they might choose to share that power, will have some just sort of official signatory authority on behalf of the authority. And then I do call out the treasurer position for the exact reason that you mentioned, that we are establishing a new organization. Its financial systems do not yet exist, and there will be quite a bit of work to conceptualize those. And then I think we can all anticipate that actually having them function for the first year and budget cycle is going to be a lot of work. And I do anticipate, and this is, I suppose, my editorial comment, that the treasurer in particular will have a substantial role in the oversight of that initial system setup and system operation.
Thank you, Leo.
So I believe I have my hand up. Maybe that's not the case. I just wanted to ask a question. If we do co-chairs, they both have the same authorities, or is it a chair? As it's written here, it said a chair and a co-chair, and is there a differentiation between that, where only the chairperson would have those duties and the co-chair would only exercise some of those duties when the chair is absent? Much more like a chair and vice chair.
Thank you, John. So recognizing that I am not the one to provide sort of conclusive legal advice to the authority, what I can just offer is a little bit more familiarity with the text of the ILA. So it does name specifically a chair, and then it contemplates a vice chair. It calls them a chairperson and vice chairperson. And then that the implementation board members may create offices of treasurer and secretary. The other thing is you have the ability to create bylaws, so long as those bylaws are not inconsistent with the ILA. And so the bylaws are a place where you might construct a different set of officers, like, again, as long as they are not inconsistent. And then I don't know the answer on delegation of authority, except that I think we have silence in the ILA, although I will confirm that, and I would presume that silence is a space that you could occupy through your bylaws.
Bylaws. I didn't see it in the ILA specifically spelled out. So.
And Leo, I chatted you. I believe Juanita has a comment, and then after that, Harold.
Please, Juanita. Thank you, Carrie.
Did you call my name, or was it someone?
Yes, Juanita, if you had your hand up, would be happy to take your guidance right now.
Well, actually, I just made a comment. I didn't have my hand up. Just clarification.
Okay. I see now. I see a nomination of Harold as co-chair. And then Harold, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Section 9, Article 9, Section 1, the last line in that, it does say nothing prevents the implementation board from naming or putting the chair, vice chair into a co-chair position. So 2 positions. Were you referring to the bylaws we'd have to come up with to do that? Or can we do that at the start without bylaws? Because implementation board has that right to make 2 co-chairs.
No, I again, just from a staff perspective, Harold, I think you're right on that you all could adopt that construction. So just to read it for everyone, what Harold is pointing out, nothing prevents the implementation board from appointing co-chairs or combining the offices of chairperson and vice chairperson into co-chairs. So you do have a lot of flexibility there just by terms of the ILA without even going into a bylaws construction. So again, recognizing that we do have a nomination, and so I don't want to move past that. I don't know what input the board has about whether this is something that you would like to act upon today, or whether you would like to defer for the next board meeting action. And if there are any thoughts from any of the board members on how you'd like to proceed. One thing I will note is you have Jason and I as your, again, facilitators. I think once we do have a chair or co-chairs, the flow of the meeting will be able to adapt a little bit more so that you as your own board are moving yourselves forward, and then we're more actively supporting you as opposed to actively facilitating right now. So again, I think the motion on the table to use that is that we did have a nomination of Harold as co-chair, and I think the question is whether the board would like to act upon that right now, or act upon something else, or defer action to the next meeting.
I would certainly nominate Harold for anything. I think, though, the first thing we need to do before we can nominate folks is to decide whether we would be going for co-chairpersons, just as a sort of a basic matter. As I will second that nomination, but I think first we need to figure out together what sort of structure we're talking about here. If we're talking about co-chairpersons, if we're talking about a chairperson and a vice chairperson. So there seems to be some preliminary things we need to figure out first.
And I think John has his hand up.
Yes, I'll leave it at this. I think one thing we also need to make sure that we do is we establish some guidelines about the use of chat for substantive comment versus being called upon. Nominations weren't open. I don't have a major problem with Harold, but nominations weren't open. And I agree with Sarah. I think we need to determine whether they will be co-equal chairs, which I think the answer is still unclear, but if the board decides that they would have, that both functions of the chair would be rolled into the co-chair, I think that is a decision that should be made. So that means two people have to sign off on the financial dealings along with the treasurer or contracts. That's okay. But I would prefer to wait. Maybe we put together a nominating committee. Maybe we just wait until next time and we hear what, maybe some people have the opportunity to offer to take part in one of the officer roles. I do not wish to do that, so I won't put my name forward, but maybe that's a way to do it, is to allow people, if they would like to take part in one of those roles. But I would agree that if we can decide on the co-chair issue today, it would be good. The duties of the co-chairs.
Thank you, John. And just to note, I mean, you're getting a little bit more deference from me than you will likely get from your own chair once you have that person in place. So what I hear so far is two comments to really address structurally how you'd like to build the executive committee before populating it. Damien, please.
Even beyond the structural aspects, which are important and need to be addressed, I go back to where the conversation at the beginning of the board meeting started, with the understanding that we don't even know each other. And so we're coming to the end of our second 90-minute meeting. And it's, when you come onto an existing board, there may be some structure and some understanding in folks, and you just have the opportunity to kind of sit back and learn, but we're starting something anew. And for me, it's hard to really get a sense of, one, who may even be interested in serving in such a capacity, and two, understanding the different strengths that we might bring to the table to be able to serve in some of these roles potentially. And so for me, assuming that we're not probably going to go beyond much longer than our scheduled meeting, I would prefer to wait until the next meeting, or if there's consensus around creating some type of committee to do some additional vetting.
So taking what I have heard, I have two proposals that I think I can reflect. One is whether the board would like to form a committee, and that committee could begin to set out options on the question of structure and composition of an executive committee. I think that's option one. Option two is that we as staff could put together something that looks a little bit like a decision-making document that has different structures using the guidance that you've already provided, and then bring that to the next meeting for your consideration. And that whether it's by that first option or the second option, the discussion of that could be something that you all could take on in your next meeting, and then just amplifying Damien's comment that this is made more difficult by the fact that this is an entirely new group and an entirely new structure.
Yeah, that was my concern as well. I'm sure I'm surrounded by a group of wonderful people, but it takes time to get to know one another. And I just want to know what the process is. For some reason, I'm just not able to unmute. And so I wanted to say some things earlier, but to the point that's on the docket now, that would be my only concern.
I think I completely agree that we don't know each other enough to vote. But I feel pretty strongly that I would prefer to go with the co-chair model instead of a chair versus a chair and a vice chair. And I feel like we could make that decision without super knowing each other and just having equal decision-making amongst those two leads.
Again, do we know what the responsibilities are? I mean, we all come to the table with perhaps different understandings of what that means. Is there consensus on what the responsibilities are?
We do have, there is some text there. We are arriving at close to the closing hour. So if I may presume to do this, I think what we can do either of is if the board would like to form a committee that could formulate options for the larger board to consider at the next meeting, or if you would like to assign to staff to do some initial analysis and proposal using the input you've already provided, and we could come back with a decision memo. I think either of those are things that we could do to answer this question of structure, and then provide, you would either know the answer as a committee before the next meeting, or we could provide the materials before the next meeting.
This is Helen. One other thing I guess I have some concerns about, the role of treasurer. I really, would like, there's some fiduciary responsibilities and other things involved, even though it's a government entity. I would really like to feel confident that the person who is elected into that role has some significant expertise. And I don't know enough about everybody at the table to know.
Absolutely. And just to note, treasurer and secretary are discretionary, and the board has the ability to form other offices as well. But just to try to make sure that we are turning back to you something that you can work with at your next meeting, does the board, or would the board like to take a vote on whether to direct staff to formulate options, or whether you would like to form a committee?
Leo, when you say options, do you mean options that we have, or options on the people that we have?
I apologize. It would be, well, one, what you tell us to do, but two, what I would suggest is that we could come back to you with a couple of specific options about the structure. So this is what a chair, vice chair structure looks like. And according to geographic distribution, racial ethnic distribution, and inclusion of lived experience. Two, this is what it could look like in a co-chair model, and just lay that out a little bit more explicitly so that you all have some material to work with. Or if you'd like to have a subcommittee again come together, which was another suggestion that I heard.
One of the things, I'm sorry, Harold.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I think I keep hearing is people expressing a desire to get to know each other more, and some of those issues that you mentioned, Leo, would come to light, and we'd find out if we had more opportunity to talk, if somebody had accounting background or things like that. It seems like it may be important to invest some time very soon to allow the implementation board members to get to know each other.
And I think that goes towards the retreat idea, and you can do those at, there are ways to do that where they are meetings, and I think that there are ways to do that where they don't qualify as a meeting if you're not in board business. And so that's something we can try to schedule. I did also hear that the ability to actually reckon with issues is a good way to get to know each other as well. And what you are hearing from us as staff is, right now you have 2 signatories to an ILA that are sort of proxy staffing you. The ability to establish an officer who can act on your behalf and help us form agendas will be helpful over time. And I hear that we can't move too quickly on that or get ahead of people knowing each other. So we now, I think, have 3 options on the table. One is, and none of them are exclusive necessarily. One of them is to make sure we're facilitating meeting and getting to know each other. And then 2, we have whether you would like us to take no action with respect to proposing structures, whether you would like us to, so that you can have a retreat or a similar meeting. 2 is whether you would like staff to prepare options about structure, not people, to Harold's question. Or 3, whether you would like to form a subcommittee that can continue this conversation before the next meeting.
I'm for staff writing out those options of co-chair, what the co-chair model looks like, chair, vice chair, but also just the urgent sense of urgency and timing of us to be able to have this retreat or group discussions just to better know each other in parallel. Not sure whether or not there's a timeliness or urgency in an upcoming timeline that we do need to have a set of leadership in place on behalf of the board sooner than later, but what that push and pull, that pressure might be, but hoping that we can get both of these in parallel done soon in anticipation of that.
So I would make a motion, Ms. Harold, I'd make a motion that we go with option 2, that the staff bring us back more of a structure and how they would look, chair, vice chair, or 2 co-chairs. The treasurer and the other office, I think we can wait on that because I will go with Helen. We do need to know what the structure is and the expertise in those areas. I believe we've all facilitated, run meetings and been part of boards. We all have that experience and that kind of luxury that we have been blessed with.
Second that motion.
All right, I will presume to insert myself just to go ahead and call the question then. So we've got a motion and a second to have staff prepare options, at least for chair and co-chair, and what those duties would look like, overlaid with the parameters that the board has directed. If all in favor, is there anyone who is opposed to this motion? If you could say so, please. All right, does not look like we are going to have a division. So if everyone who's in favor could put a thumbs up on your screen if you're capable of doing that, either digitally or in real life. And we will not call the roll. We have all thumbs up. You have just taken the first vote as an implementation board to give us direction. So we've got that. And that gets us through the part of the agenda that I was on, and we'll defer to Carrie for very quick closure. And actually, that's me. Next step. So we're going to come back to you with that. It sounds like we need to schedule a retreat. I do want to say, and we'll ask for individual feedback later, I do not anticipate that we will have an in-person retreat with this group. So when we say retreat, I think it's just another form of a digital gathering somehow, and we'll have to figure out what that looks like to meet your intent, but I do not presume that we are talking about an in-person gathering, and would ask somebody to say so if they disagreed, but we are under significant limitations there right now, just to say that. So if that sounds like a plan, we are going to come back to you with an agenda for the next meeting. At that next meeting, we will seek to provide additional information on the 6 decisions that you had that Sola and Jason presented and seek a decision on those. We will try to arrange, or will arrange for you, a retreat type digital gathering in the meantime that's focused not on board business, but just on getting to know each other. We will also present a memorandum before the next meeting that lays out some of the structural options for an executive committee with the parameters that you have provided. And unless I have missed something, in which case we recorded it, I believe that is what we have for next steps. We are grateful to you all for your attendance and leadership. If there's a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Seconded.
We got a motion and a second. If we got thumbs up on adjourning the meeting, I think that's it. Thank you, members of the implementation board.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everybody.
Leah.
Thanks, everyone.